Hey everybody, and welcome to Why It's Awesome. This is a new series I'm trying out where I pick a game that I'm currently playing and try to explain to you in 10 minutes or less why it's awesome. So this is a game called Guzzlers Extreme, which you might start off by thinking, well, the title is probably a reason why it's not awesome. But let's not dwell on that because this game has a bunch of other cool stuff going for it. So what you're probably getting out of this introductory video is that this game harkens back to the good old days of combat racing games. And I'm talking about classics like your Interstate 76, Vigilante 8, your original Twisted Metal games, even newer, more recent kind of retreads of that concept like Full Auto and things of that nature. This is combat car racing, strapping big-ass guns to crazy-looking cars and going at it in a variety of game modes. And one of the things that's really interesting about this particular game is that it actually combines circuit racing with multiple branching paths with traditional Twisted Metal style arena combat modes, where you have things like deathmatch and capture the flag and all that sort of thing. But instead of having to go to multiple games to scratch those different itches, you have all of those modes represented pretty well in this one single game, which, by the way, is a meager $20 on Steam, which, given the overall quality of this title, I have to say, if you're into combat racing games, this is a game you definitely need to check out. It's definitely worth your time. But let me continue to try to prove that to you, just in case you are somewhat skeptical based on that initial impression and the introductory video. So basically, there's several modes in the game. There's a career mode, a multiplayer mode, a quick race mode. Here we can see the garage in the career mode where I'm able to tinker with this first vehicle that I've purchased, which is strikingly similar to a Reliant Robin. People who are into cars will know why that's funny. The thing about this game is, even in a Reliant Robin knockoff, you still can get some pretty decent handling using a standard Xbox 360 controller and default configuration. Now, as you'll see a little later in the video, there are a ton of configuration options for this game, not the least of which being very precise, detailed ways that you can tweak controllers and steering wheels and whatever your preferred input device might be for playing a game of this sort. And in terms of where this comes down on the driving handling, you know, arcade versus simulation, this is definitely leaning more in the arcade direction, but with some surprising nods to simulation style gameplay, especially with regard to grip and traction and how the cars actually handle through corners. I find some similarities between this game and, say, more simulation-y or less arcadey type games, like a Grid or a Gran Turismo or maybe even a Forza kind of like handling model. There's still a lot of drifting, there's still a lot of breaking the tires loose, there's still a lot of arcadey kind of, you know, edge of your seat driving action in this game, but it definitely has some things that ground it a little bit, like the cars have weight and heft and poise to them that's a little bit more than what you might expect from a typical arcade racing game. And I think you really see it here in first person, where as I'm tweaking the steering of the car, you can actually see the body roll and how the car is pivoting and adjusting itself based on my turning in a way that your typical arcade racer, the car would just always stay flat to the road and there's no real sense of suspension or poise as you have here in this game. Another thing I should mention is, obviously you saw a lot of gunplay in the introductory video. This particular race that I've recorded for the purposes of this is just more of a straight up race based on power-ups, where you can get repair power-ups or boost power-ups that you can use periodically to try to help get you through the race, but there's no actual gunplay in this particular footage. I did that for two reasons. One, because I thought it would be a little easier to watch and pay attention, because when the gunplay is happening, things get kind of frantic and it almost becomes a little too chaotic to notice what's going on and point things out from a analysis standpoint. But the other reason is that I was trying to record this footage with the specific purpose of talking about the game, and I didn't want things happening in the game that I wasn't talking about, and that disconnect between the two. So with this more generic, regular driving footage, it makes it a little easier to talk about things that aren't necessarily happening on the screen. This was a game that kind of snuck up on me. It was definitely not on my radar at all. I'm aware that there was a version of this available on Desura for a while, but because I typically don't use that service to acquire my games, I wasn't really aware of this game's existence until it showed up on Steam. I'm not necessarily sure that there's any significant difference between the Steam version and what appears on there, with the possible exception of Steam achievements, which there seem to be plenty of. This game tends to dole out achievements on a fairly regular basis just through normal gameplay, so if that's something that you're interested in, you'll be very pleased at how many achievements you can log just from a couple quick sessions of gameplay with this. Multiplayer seems to be extremely competent and well done. There's a lot of really interesting twists and wrinkles to the multiplayer, in that you can actually do team racing, which I'm a big fan of. You know, the ability to get a couple of buddies together and race as a team in multiplayer against other groups of players or AIs. Yes, this game does have AI racing in multiplayer, so if you wanted to, say, make a private server using the included dedicated server tool and get on there with your buddies and race against teams of AIs, you could certainly do that. It's also real easy to jump into the many dedicated servers that the developer has set up, although I found that most of them were empty in this first week of playing the game. That doesn't necessarily mean that will always be the case. I was always able to find a game with people in it. There just maybe weren't necessarily a ton of choices in terms of server configurations and game modes that people were actually actively playing. But again, with the inclusion of bots, and the bots being actually fairly competent and having a fairly wide range of difficulties that you can set them to, I think there's a lot of enjoyment to be had in this game, even just racing against the AIs. As you can see here, just in a normal single-player race, I only managed to come in second. I probably had a shot at first there if I'd have taken that last turn better, but you know, it's always a little tricky when you're recording for the camera. I'll use that as my excuse. But as you can see here, there's a fairly sophisticated damage modeling at work in this game, and my best indication is that a lot of that damage is directly reflected based on things that happened in the race. Like in some of the combat races, I could actually see where bullet holes were appearing on the car in places where I'd actually been shot in the previous race. I'm not sure how one-to-one that is, but it's definitely neat that they bother to do any sort of damage modeling at that level in a game like this. And it does seem to benefit you to repair your vehicle in between races, because it seems to make it more durable, and it seems to perform better in the subsequent races when you come into them fully repaired. But to kind of wrap things up here, I just wanted to show how incredibly extensive the customization options are for this game. I mean, you got a ton of video options there, like down to nitty-gritty 3D settings and details, a lot of great audio options, a lot of great controller options, and just in-game options. You know, as I alluded to before, when you're on a server, there's the ability to vote and change up the gameplay at will. So if the server is configured properly, it's really easy to toggle things like rubber banding or friendly fire or the game mode or any number of options. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about this game. I definitely think it's a winner, especially for people who are into these sorts of games. I highly recommend checking it out, and I will see you next time.